Mommy, Daddy cries where Uncle Marcus' blue
What do you
shoe
mean,
goes.
sweetheart?
The red door room. Daddy said you must never know.
Everyone stopped laughing, and my husband's face turned white.
At my husband's birthday party, our 3-year-old daughter pointed at his best friend's shoe and said, "Daddy cries there." Everyone laughed. I did too until I saw the pale blue paint beneath the man's heel and realized my daughter had just told me where my husband went every Tuesday night. Hello, my name is Claire Bennett, and until that evening, I believed I had a good marriage. Not a perfect one, but a real one. I thought my husband, Daniel, was hardworking, loyal, and perhaps a little too private. I thought his best friend, Marcus Reed, was practically family. I was wrong about both of them. Daniel's 38th birthday party was held in our backyard in Columbus, Ohio. I had spent 2 weeks preparing it. White lights hung above the patio. Music played softly near the grill. Our friends stood in small groups with glasses in their hands, laughing at story Daniel had told 100 times. Daniel looked happy. He wore the navy shirt I had bought him and moved through the crowd like a man who had nothing to hide. Marcus arrived late. That was normal for him. He always came in with an excuse and an expensive bottle of bourbon. That night, he wore polished brown shoes. While he was talking to Daniel near the kitchen door, our daughter, Lily, ran across the patio with a piece of birthday cake in her hand. She stopped in front of Marcus and stared down. There was a thin mark of pale paint around the edge of his right sole. Lily pointed at it and announced, "Daddy cries there." The people nearest us laughed. Someone said children had wonderful imaginations. Marcus smiled, but his smile arrived too late. Daniel's face went still. I crouched beside Lily. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" She tapped the blue paint with one sticky finger. "Blue floor. Daddy cries there. Uncle Marcus says be quiet." The laughter stopped. Daniel recovered first. He lifted Lily into his arms and said she must be remembering the time Marcus helped him paint an office. His voice sounded casual, but one of his hands was trembling. Marcus immediately agreed. "The storage room at work," he said. "Blue floor. She visited once, remember?" I did not remember. Lily had never visited Daniel's office. Before I could ask another question, Daniel carried her toward the swing set. Marcus followed him. They spoke with their backs to me. Marcus glanced over his shoulder twice. I smiled when guests looked at me. I cut more cake. I thanked everyone for coming. But inside, something cold had opened beneath my ribs. For 6 months, Daniel had left our house every Tuesday at 7. He said he was attending a grief support group because the death of his older brother, Ethan, still haunted him. I had never challenged that explanation. Ethan had died in a car accident 8 years earlier, and Daniel rarely spoke about him without becoming emotional. Now Lily's words repeated in my mind. Blue floor. Daddy cries there. Uncle Marcus says be quiet. After the last guest left, I found Daniel wiping the kitchen counter, though it was already clean. "When did Lily visit your storage room?" I asked. He kept wiping. "Months ago. You probably forgot. I have never taken her to your office." Maybe Marcus did. Why would Marcus take our daughter anywhere without telling me? He dropped the cloth into the sink. "Claire," it was a child's confused sentence. "Don't turn it into something ugly." That was the moment I knew there was something ugly to find. I did not argue. I apologized and told him I was tired. He kissed my forehead, relieved by how quickly I surrendered. Upstairs, Lily was asleep with her stuffed rabbit under one arm. On the floor beside her bed was a drawing I had not seen before. 3 stick figures stood inside a blue square. One was small, one had long black arms, and the third was lying down. In the corner, Lily had drawn a red door. I took a photograph and returned the paper exactly where I found it. The next morning, I asked Lily about it while Daniel was in the shower. "Who are these people?" Quoted carefully. "Me, Daddy. Uncle Marcus." "Why is Daddy on the floor?" Her little face tightened. "Daddy sad. He says sorry to the lady." "What lady?" "The sleeping lady." My heart began pounding so hard I could hear it. Then the shower stopped. Lily looked toward the hallway and whispered, "Secret game." Daniel had taught our daughter to keep a secret from me. I spent that day telling myself not to panic. There could be an innocent explanation. Perhaps Daniel had gone to a private therapist. Perhaps the sleeping lady was a statue, a photograph, or something Lily had misunderstood. But innocent explanations do not require a 3-year-old to play a secret game. That afternoon, I checked the family calendar. 6 weeks earlier, on a Tuesday, I had taken my mother to a medical appointment. Marcus had offered to watch Lily until Daniel returned from work. When I came home, both men were in our kitchen, and Lily was asleep on the sofa. They told me she had been there all evening. Apparently, she had not. The following Tuesday, I told Daniel I had a headache and planned to sleep early. At 7, I watched through the bedroom window as he climbed into Marcus's black SUV. I waited 5 minutes, then followed them in my sister's old Honda, which I had borrowed without explaining why. They drove south, away from Daniel's office and away from every support group I could find online. 40 minutes later, They turned onto a narrow county road lined with bare trees. I stayed far behind. The SUV stopped beside an abandoned auto repair shop. Its sign had been removed, but the building still had a red metal door. Through a broken side window, I could see a pale blue floor. My hands went numb around the steering wheel. Daniel and Marcus entered. Marcus carried a black duffel bag. I parked behind a row of trees and approached on foot. The building smelled of oil, wet concrete, and old metal. Voices came from the back room. Marcus sounded angry. "You need to pull yourself to there." Daniel answered. "I see her every time I close my eyes." "It was an accident. We left her there." For a moment, I could not breathe. I raised my phone and began recording. Daniel said, "Claire thinks Ethan was driving. She still believes the police report." Marcus lowered his voice, and I moved closer to the red door. "The report protected all of us," he said. "Your father paid to make it disappear. Ethan agreed to take the blame before he died. That is the end of it." Then something scraped behind me. I turned and saw a rat knock an empty can across the floor. The sound rolled through the building. The voices stopped. The red door opened. I slipped behind a stack of tires just before Marcus stepped into the hall. His brown shoes stopped less than 6 feet from me. Pale blue paint marked the soles. My phone was still recording. I covered its screen with my palm. Marcus stood there for what felt like an hour. Then Daniel called his name, and he went back inside. I left without looking behind me. I drove to a gas station 10 miles away and listened to the recording. The audio was faint but clear enough. The police report protected all of us. Ethan agreed to take the blame. We left her there. Ethan's accident had killed a 21-year-old nursing student named Rachel Cole. According to the official story, Ethan had been driving drunk. His car struck Rachel while she was walking home from work. Ethan lost control several miles later, hit a tree, and died. Daniel had always said he arrived at the hospital too late to speak to his brother. But Marcus's words suggested Ethan had been alive long enough to agree to a lie. And Daniel's words suggested Rachel might not have died immediately. I wanted to go directly to the police, but the recording was incomplete. It did not prove who had been driving or what they had done after the crash. Daniel's father, Richard Bennett, had been a powerful attorney. Even retired, he still had friends in law enforcement. If I accused them too soon, they could destroy evidence and perhaps take Lily from me. So I went home. Daniel was already there when I arrived. He was sitting in the dark living room. "Where were you?" he asked. I held up a pharmacy bag. I had bought pain medicine and toothpaste at the gas station. My headache got worse. "Where were you?" "Group." He lied without blinking. Then he noticed mud on my shoes. "Did you walk somewhere?" I looked down and laughed. "Lily made me chase her through the garden this afternoon." He watched me for several seconds. Then he smiled. That smile frightened me more than anger would have. Over the next week, I became 2 people. One was Daniel's wife. She made breakfast, discussed press school, and kissed him before work. The other waited until he slept, photographed documents, copied passwords, and searched 8 years of bank statements. I found payments from a company called Reed Property Services to a woman named Martha Cole. Cole, Rachel's family name. The payments began 1 month after the crash and continued every 3 months. Marcus owned Reed Property Services. Daniel transferred money to Marcus a few days before each payment. It looked like hush money. Then I found something worse. In our fireproof safe was an old envelope addressed to Daniel. Inside was a letter from Ethan, dated 2 days after the crash and 1 day before he died in the hospital. "Daniel, Dad says I have to say I was driving because they found my blood in the front seat. I moved there after the crash because Marcus was too drunk to think. You both promised you would call for help. You promised the girl was already gone. If that was a lie, I need you to tell someone. I cannot carry all 3 of you with me." Ethan had not caused the crash. Marcus had been driving. Daniel had been in the car. They had moved Ethan into the driver's seat, abandoned Rachel, and let a dying man accept the blame. I photographed every page, then placed the letter back in the safe. My first impulse was to take Lily and disappear. But as I stood over her bed that night, I thought of Rachel's mother receiving secret payments instead of the truth. I thought of Ethan dying with his name ruined. I thought of Daniel teaching my child that love meant silence. Leaving would protect us. Exposing them would protect everyone they might hurt next. The next morning, I contacted a criminal attorney named Naomi Price. She had no connection to the Bennett family and a reputation for handling police corruption cases. I showed her the recording, the bank records, the letter, and Lily's drawing. Naomi listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Do not confront your husband. Do not tell him you are leaving. Back up everything in 3 places. And from now on, assume he is watching you." She arranged a meeting with a state investigator rather than local police. The investigator, Agent Ruiz, explained that the old case could be reopened, but they needed stronger evidence. Ethan's letter was important, yet Daniel's lawyer might call it unreliable. The payments could be explained as charity. My recording suggested a cover-up, but the voices never clearly named the driver or victim. Can you get one of them to say it? Ruiz asked. I felt sick. You want me to wear a wire? Only if you choose to? I thought of Lily whispering, secret game. I choose to. Before we could plan it, Daniel made his own move. I came home from the grocery store on Friday and found him sitting at the kitchen table with Lily's drawing in front of him. Why did you photograph this? He asked. My blood turned cold. He had checked my phone. I forced myself to look confused. Because it was cute. You asked Lily questions about the blue room. She said something strange at the party. Of course I asked. His voice softened. Claire, grief can make people paranoid. Your father died last year. Maybe you should talk to someone. There it was, the first step in building a story that I was unstable. I began to cry, not because I was afraid, but because I needed him to believe I had broken. I told him I was overwhelmed. I apologized for doubting him. I said I had been terrified he was having an affair. His shoulders relaxed. He came around the table and held me. There is no other woman, he whispered. Technically, he was telling the truth. The woman between us had been dead for 8 years. That evening, Daniel announced that Richard was hosting a family dinner on Sunday. Richard wanted to discuss his estate because his health was declining. It was the opportunity we needed. Naomi and Agent Ruiz created a plan. I would wear a small recording device. I would tell Daniel I had found Ethan's letter and demand an explanation before the family dinner. If he confessed, agents would move in. If he became violent, they would move sooner. On Sunday, I left Lily safely with my sister. Then I drove with Daniel to Richard's enormous house outside the city. Marcus was already there. Of course he was. Richard sat at the head of the dining table. At 72, he still had the cold, controlled manner of a courtroom attorney. He began talking about trust funds, property, and the future of the Bennett name. I waited until dessert. Then I placed a copy of Ethan's letter on the table. Daniel stopped breathing. Marcus knocked over his glass. Richard did not move at all. I know what happened to Rachel Cole, I said. For 5 long seconds, no one spoke. Then Richard folded his napkin and said, You have misunderstood a private family tragedy. Did Marcus drive the car? Daniel stared at his plate. Marcus stood. I'm leaving. Sit down, Richard ordered. Marcus sat. That single command told me who had controlled them all these years. Richard looked at me. Ethan was dying. Marcus had a future. Daniel had a wife and a child ahead of him. Difficult choices were made. I was not his wife then. And Lily wasn't born. Which proves the choice protected something valuable. I had never hated anyone as completely as I hated him in that moment. I turned to Daniel. Tell me the truth. Did Rachel die on impact? His eyes filled with tears. Marcus said, Don't answer her. Daniel whispered, No. The room seemed to tilt. What happened? She was breathing, he said. She was conscious for a few minutes. She kept asking me to call her mother. My nails dug into my palms, but I kept my voice steady. Why didn't you call 911? Marcus slammed his hand on the table. Because I had 2 prior DUIs. I would have gone to prison. Ethan was drunk too. He was already hurt. Richard said we could make it look like Ethan was driving. And Rachel? Marcus looked away. Daniel answered. We put her near the side of the road. Dad called someone he knew. By the time an ambulance was officially dispatched, she was dead. There it was. The truth, spoken clearly. Richard studied my face. He had finally noticed that I was not shocked enough. She's recording us, he said. Marcus lunged across the table. Daniel grabbed my arm and I screamed. The dining room doors burst open before Marcus reached me. Agent Ruiz entered with 3 state officers. Another team came through the front hall. Daniel released me immediately. Richard remained seated. You have no idea how many careers this will destroy. I looked him in the eye. Then they were careers built on a grave. Marcus was arrested for his role in Rachel's death and the conspiracy that followed. Daniel was arrested for evidence tampering, obstruction, and failing to render aid. Richard faced charges connected to bribery, falsifying evidence, and conspiracy. The investigation also reached a retired detective and a former county official. The story became statewide news. For several days, reporters stood outside our house. Strangers online called me brave. Others called me disloyal. Richard's friends suggested I had destroyed my family for attention. But my family had been destroyed 8 years earlier. I had simply turned on the light. The most painful conversation was with Rachel's mother, Martha. She agreed to meet me in Naomi's office. She was a small woman with silver hair and tired eyes. I expected anger. Instead, she placed the payment records on the table and began to cry. Richard had told the money came from an anonymous driver who felt guilty for passing the crash without stopping. Martha had accepted it because Rachel's younger brother needed surgery. I thought it was kindness, she said. All these years, I thanked the person who helped hide my daughter's last moments. I told her none of it was her fault. Then I played Daniel's confession, the part where he said Rachel had asked for her mother. Martha closed her eyes. When the recording ended, she asked me to play it again. This time, she did not cry. Now I know she wasn't alone, she said. Someone heard her. He failed her, but someone heard her. The courts moved slowly, as courts do. Marcus eventually accepted a plea agreement that included a long prison sentence. Daniel cooperated with prosecutors and received less time, but not freedom. Richard lost his law license, most of his fortune, and the respected name he had protected at the cost of 2 lives. I filed for divorce. Daniel asked to see me before sentencing. I almost refused, but I wanted one answer. We met in a secure room at the county jail. He looked older than he had 3 months earlier. Without his expensive watch and careful clothes, he seemed smaller. Did you ever plan to tell me? I asked. He stared at his hands. Every Tuesday. I went to that garage and tried. Dad kept the car there for years before it was destroyed. I thought if I stood where it happened, I could make myself confess. But Marcus always came. He reminded me what I would lose. So you cried, yes, and you took Lily there. His face collapsed. He said that on the night Marcus watched her, Daniel had called in a panic. Marcus brought Lily to the garage because he did not want to leave her with a sitter. She had seen Daniel on the blue floor, crying beside the outline of an old oil stain. Marcus told her to keep quiet. I never wanted her involved, he said. You involved her the moment you taught her that protecting you mattered more than telling me the truth. He asked if I could forgive him someday. I told him forgiveness was not a door he could stand outside and expect me to open. It was something I might build for myself, far away from him. Then I left. Richard tried one final act of revenge before his sentencing. He changed his will and removed Lily from the family trust. He wanted to punish his granddaughter for the truth her mother had exposed. But Richard had overlooked one detail. Years earlier, when my father helped Daniel launch his construction company, he required a clause giving me half ownership if the marriage ended because of proven criminal conduct. Richard had mocked the clause as unnecessary. Now it transferred control of the company's most valuable properties to me. I sold the abandoned garage and Daniel's share of the business. After paying legal costs and securing Lily's future, I donated a significant portion of the proceeds to a scholarship fund in Rachel's name for nursing students who could not afford tuition. Martha helped select the first recipient. On the day the scholarship was announced, Lily and I visited a small memorial garden beside the college. Lily was 4 by then. She no longer spoke about the blue room. She asked why the plaque carried Rachel's name. I told her Rachel had wanted to help sick people, and now her name would help others finish what she had started. Lily considered that, then placed a yellow flower beneath the plaque. Did I help too? She asked. I knelt beside her. Yes, sweetheart. You told the truth when the grown-ups were afraid to. She smiled and took my hand. People often say my revenge was sending 3 men to prison, or taking the company Richard believed would preserve his family name. It wasn't. My revenge was refusing to become another silent person in their story. They had spent 8 years burying the truth beneath money, fear, and a dead man's reputation. Then a 3-year-old noticed a little blue paint on a shoe, and their entire world cracked open. Daniel once told me that silence was how a family survived. He was wrong. Silence protected the guilty. The truth protected my daughter. And that is the inheritance I chose to leave her.